My name is Imran. I'm a lead UX designer at Co-op Digital. We work on the Experience Library. The Experience Library is our design system. For those not familiar with a design system is a set of tools, resources that enable teams to build, design, and launch products and services. My previous role was UX manager at Otto Group. It's nice to see some of my colleagues here today, so that's been a pleasant surprise. I mentor with Diverse and Equal. Diverse and Equal are a tech for good organisation. They try and get people from different diverse backgrounds into design and UX, and it always feels good to give something back to the community. I've worked in UX and design for about 15 years. Saying that out loud actually seems like it's longer than it actually feels, but I guess my main takeaway is that I've observed a lot. I've seen a lot. I've gathered a lot of insights. I've seen teams work in different ways. I've seen people design and build products and services in different ways. And I guess that's why I'm here today, to share some of that insight with everyone. So the photographs that you can see on screen at the moment are of a village in Pakistan. It's the village where my dad grew up. He was born in this village and he lived there until he was 9 years old. He then moved to the UK to study. I took these photographs when I went to this village in 2008 after my dad died. My dad's death left me feeling really, really empty inside. And I really struggled to overcome that grief over a number of months. My mum pushed me to go to this village because she felt by going there perhaps I'd find something to fill that gap. I wasn't sure what I was going to find, but I went there with that glimmer of hope that maybe I would find something. When I got to this village, I walked on the same streets that my dad had walked on as a child. I went to the same school and looked around where he'd studied. I went to the same house that he'd lived in. And I spoke to lots of people that knew him as a child. And even though my dad wasn't there, I started to feel his presence around me. I started to feel a lot of the emotions that he'd brought from that country to this country. And what I experienced can be best described as empathy. Empathy for my dad, a better understanding of the life that he'd lived in Pakistan, the hardships that he'd faced, how he'd worked hard to get to where he wanted to be. And I can't think of a better definition of empathy than this. It's a mechanism which allows you to imagine the internal state of another person. Let's just think about that for a moment. That's exactly what I experienced when I went to the village. This definition is by Sarah Conrath. She's a psychologist and professor. And that is empathy in a nutshell. It's about getting into someone else's headspace. It's understanding someone else's emotions. It's walking in someone else's shoes. And just to clarify very early on, there's a distinction to make between empathy and sympathy. Again, I'm going to call on the wise words of someone else. This is Brené Brown. If you've not heard of Brené Brown, then I highly recommend that you pick up some of her books. People that have worked with me in the past will know that I'm a huge fan of Brené Brown. But empathy fuels connection with other people. Sympathy drives disconnection. Sympathy is about distance. Empathy is about being closer to someone. Now, we're told that empathy is important to design, but what does that really mean? Is empathy a step in the process of design? Is it about doing an empathy map, a bit of research, so that when we design something, we're being empathetic to the end user? Is that it? In actual fact, empathy is important to humanity. It goes beyond design. Any success that humanity has had in this world has been driven by empathy. It's been driven by compassion. It's been driven by people building good relationships, communities finding common ground between themselves, Communities understanding that working together is much better than working alone. Everything that we pin down as successful for our race is down to empathy. It's down to understanding people, systems, communities, ways of thinking. And what's interesting is that design is the same. Design is about understanding people. But there is a challenge that we face in our society. This is some really, really exceptional research that's been done over a number of decades. And over those decades, this research looked at college students in the US to see how they respond to different situations, ultimately to understand how empathetic are people. How good are people at taking perspective? How good are they at overcoming their own bias? Can they show empathetic concern to someone in distress? And this research shows that empathy and our ability to be empathetic to others is in decline. This is really worrying research, and really something we need to think about. Now, the reality is empathy is hard work. Empathy isn't easy. It takes effort, real effort. And research supports this. Again, more research that I'll call on. Daryl Cameron did some research talking to people to try and understand how they respond to empathetic situations. He worked with a number of different groups of people, and what he found was immediately people that practiced empathy, there was a cognitive cost involved. It takes effort, doesn't it? If you listen to someone, if you forget about yourself and focus on somebody else, that's real effort. If you go and do research and you try and understand the user and try and understand what the end user is doing, thinking, feeling, all of that takes real effort. Also, the globalization of technology. Technology is everywhere. We've got phones, we've got different devices, we've got watches that are telling us to do things. Yeah, it's great we can keep in touch with people. But let's just take a simple example. If I send a text to somebody and ask them how they are, the person responds and says they're okay, does that really mean they're okay? Is it easier for that person to just respond with a text to say, yeah, I'm fine? Is it harder for them to respond if they see me face to face? If I can hear their voice? Technology gets in the way of us being empathetic. And maybe as a society we don't even realize that. Maybe technology has just taken over so much that we don't realize how much it gets in the way of being compassionate, being empathetic to others. The other reason is we all want to be heard, don't we? Every person wants to be heard. We've all lived different lives. We've all faced different challenges. We're all pursuing different goals, and we all want to be heard. Sometimes we're so busy being heard that we don't listen to others. Listening is becoming a forgotten art. I love this quote from Adam Grant and this concept, inverse charisma. Imagine listening to someone in such a way that you make them feel charismatic. How amazing would that be? That we listen to someone in such a way that that person starts to believe that they have so much charisma about them. This person that's listening to me isn't doing anything other than listening to me. It's worth saying that empathy can be transformative in small and big situations. We heard Kelly talk about a team having spirit earlier. Spirit is really important. This is an example of Leicester City Football Club, a team of players that were not collated across the world, not known as world stars, but somehow they did the unthinkable. They went and won the Premier League. They beat the teams that had spent millions on players. They beat the teams that had more advanced facilities, the ability to train more, train harder, And somehow they beat those teams. The reason they did it was because they had that spirit in their team. Everybody understanding each other. Everyone there for each other. No infighting. The view that we do everything together. We win together, we lose together. Again, the idea of spirit. Storytelling is a great way to tap into empathy as well. So I have a 6-year-old boy, and the amount of empathy that I find he kind of comes across through storytelling is unreal. So when we read a story together, we read a book together, he understands different perspectives. He understands how people are different. This is an example of design work actually done by Wak, who's in the audience in one of my previous teams. So this is a great example. We were exploring the concept of pop-ups. We were finding that the people we were working with were not really receptive to the idea that, pop-ups get in the way of things. Wak came up with this genius idea to actually try and storyboard what it might feel like for someone when you go on to do something and a pop-up appears getting in the way of the thing that you're trying to do. And this is just a small example of trying to tap into that empathy, trying to understand that it's not just about this digital service, this website. There's a lot more going on. Maybe someone's had a tough day, and we've heard reference to this earlier today as well. There's more to people's lives than just the website or the app or the service that they're using. Now, this is the experience library at Co-op. As I said earlier, this is effectively our design system. I feel really fortunate to work at Co-op because our culture is all about compassion and empathy and understanding others, understanding the people around us, but also the people that we design and build for. And nothing typifies this more than the experience library. The experience library is a design system. People can come to it. If they're building a form, if they're designing a form, they can come and get input fields, they can get buttons and things like that. If they need documentation on how to write about death for funeral care services, they can come and get that as well. So it's a great resource. But we curate this system in a very unique way. Traditionally, in design systems, what you find is that the focus is on the product. So a team will say, we're going to design a design system because you know what? We want common buttons and we want alignment between input fields and we want all the images and everything to look like it comes from the single source of truth. And the focus is always on the product. Let's go out there and let's design something and hopefully people will come and use it. What we do at Co-op is very different. We don't focus on the system. We focus on the people. So we don't sit down and say we're going to design a bunch of buttons that nobody asked for. We go and talk to people and find out what problems they're experiencing. What's getting in the way of people designing and delivering products and services? What's annoying for them? What's frustrating? What slows them down? And through that approach, we suddenly have an experience library which is built for people, by people. It's built with empathy because we take that time to understand what people need. We never put anything into the experience library unless we know there's a genuine need out there within our community, within our product teams. And the experience library is the way that we practice empathy at Co-op. Because in our team, we don't have traditional stakeholders. Our stakeholders are the people out there designing product services, whether that's in store, whether that's online. Now, this is a key point. In UX, we often think that we're designing for people that are using products and services. And often that group can be quite elusive when we think of the end user. We don't live and spend all our time with the end user. We can do research, we can build up personas, but that group will always remain somewhat distant. But the people we work with, the communities that we work for, they're always around us. If we never take the time to understand the people around us, how can we possibly understand the people that are quite distant from us, the end users? if we never take that time to have empathy for those around us, the people we work with, the teams, the engineers, the product managers, the designers, the researchers, if we never find that spirit between everyone, how can we possibly create compelling digital products and services for people that we don't see every day? Now, we do a set of activities to tap into this and to really, really be empathetic towards our community. So we do insight activities. We have community conversations where we talk to people. They're not like formal research, they're just conversations. We try and just have virtual coffee or a real one if we can. And we try and find out what people are thinking, what they're doing, what they're working on, what their challenge of the week might be. We also go and observe teams working, so we'll just go and sit into a session that a team is running. Maybe they're doing a crit on a piece of work. Maybe they're defining the direction of travel on a piece of work. We'll just go and sit in and see what the team's doing. What are they faced with? What's going well? What are they missing? What are they struggling with? We do product reviews, so we'll go and review the product that the team's working on. So like with the food team, we spent last week working with the food team, trying to understand the product they're trying to improve. The website, the e-commerce app. What challenges do they face? We also do roadmap reviews. How can we possibly be empathetic to people if we don't think ahead and try and understand what they're trying to do, not just today, but tomorrow, next week, next year? What are their plans? What are they aspiring to be? And how can we help them get there? And last but not least, we do a lot of design reviews. So we bring people into our community and we ask them to share what they're working on. We try and get them as much perspective on their work, from engineering, product, research, analysis. We try and have as much input into that. And we try to be present so we can be there to facilitate the conversation. When it comes to design, we do a lot of co-designing. Now, co-designing is interpreted in a lot of different ways, but co-designing for us at Co-op, it's about more than two people working together. Maybe one person is the lead designer, and maybe the other person there is a sounding board. Maybe the other person is there to make the decisions. Co-designing can go a long way into building the empathy between people and making sure people don't feel isolated in what they're doing. And whenever we do A/B testing, it's not a singular focus on the product. It's actually what is the team trying to achieve through A/B testing? What is the end goal? What is the end game through this A/B testing? Now, I'd just like to share some feedback. And this is verbatim feedback that we've had from colleagues. Because for me, this shows the impact we can have through empathy. And I'm going to read this out because I really want these words to have that impact. There was no judgment and a clear focus on the problem we were facing now, which made the collaboration pragmatic and open. So this was a colleague in the legal services department, and we worked with that colleague and her team, and we helped them get to where they needed to go. But we didn't go in there with the thought of, you know what, we've got a design system. We'll take the lead, we'll design things, and we'll tell you when we're done. We allowed them to lead. We listened, we observed, and we understood. We made people feel important. They're there to support and not try and take anything over. Another example, again, I'll read out the words. What we've come away with is not only solutions to our specific problems, but as a team, we have a clearer understanding of some of these design principles and a deeper appreciation of the discipline. Now, one of the things I've always seen in design is people trying to get to have that voice in their organization, so that design is important. And this quote for me just shows how empathy can get you there. Sometimes fighting against people isn't going to work, but actually taking them on a journey, joining them on their journey and listening to them, understanding them, can go quite far. And with this particular group of people that we worked with, what was really interesting was after we worked with them, they started using the experience library more. They started engaging with our team around the experience library more. I remember their engineers reaching out to me saying, Imran, I've never heard of the experience library. How can I use it? Tell me more about it. So how can you practice empathy? How can you bring empathy into the work that you do? How can you make sure empathy for you is not just about the people that you're designing for, but the people that you're working with, the people that you need to help, and the people that are helping you so you can deliver compelling digital products and services. So the first step is to use technology wisely. There's no doubt that we live in a remote-first world. It's easier to go and get onto a Zoom call. It's easier to go and send someone a text or a Slack message or a Teams message. But try and speak to people. Try and understand what they're going through, what they're working with, what they're challenged with. Try and have conversations. If you can't see them in person, ring them. Try and make time for those real conversations where you can connect with someone and you're not just relying on a message, which perhaps doesn't give you the full insight that you need to have. I touched on co-designing before, but co-designing is a really compelling way to design. At least two people working together, sharing in that journey, supporting each other, understanding each other. It's a wonderful way to design and not to feel isolated where you sat working on something on your own in a Figma file, but you're actually working with people, maybe in a virtual or a physical space. Now this is a really hard one, being present. Technology kind of gets in the way of this. How can you be present? How can you not get distracted by your phone or your watch or the other devices that you've got around you? How can you focus everything that you're doing on that person that you're listening to? That person that is likely telling you about what they're experiencing, the good, the bad, the challenges. And being present is really important. We try and practice this at Quap when we go and talk to teams. We switch off Slack, we switch off Teams, everything goes off. Our focus is on that person when we're having that conversation. Everything in that moment is about that person and not about us. And I said earlier, listening is a forgotten art at the moment. We're easily distracted. We want to be heard. But empathic listening is so important to the work that we do in design and research. You can't design compelling services and products if you're not willing to listen. How are you going to listen to people that are often quite distant when we talk about the end user if you're not going to listen to the people that are next to you, talking to you, working with you? Perhaps we're talking about engineers. Perhaps we're talking about product managers. Empathic listening is absolutely key. And you can practice empathic listening in lots of different ways. I'd strongly urge you to have a look at what Indy Young does in this respect. She's absolutely amazing when it comes to talking about empathic listening. She's written books. But the fact that you take that time to recognize emotions in people. Remember, when you're working with someone, they're not just there for the work. They've got other things going on in their lives. They bring all of that to work. They bring all of that to the table when they sit down and talk to you and design with you and research with you. And to actually recognize those emotions in a person is really important in the work that we do. Often I've seen teams where there's very much two different perspectives, and it's very hard to get into that kind of like shared perspective space. And it's actually because one side is saying that our perspective is true and the other side is saying that their perspective is true. The reality is every perspective is true. You don't have to agree to every perspective, but you have to understand it. And you have to recognize that everybody's perspective is theirs to own. We've touched on communicating recognition earlier, but that's something we don't often do. We don't recognize and then communicate that recognition to someone. When someone is speaking to you and telling you something, actually they want to know that you're listening to them. Recognizing and actually communicating that recognition goes a long way to someone feeling that they can keep sharing and keep being open with you and tell you exactly what they're thinking. And critically, the last step, stay out of judgment. Maybe you're a designer and you've got your own view on how you work with engineers. but try and stay out of judgment. Maybe engineers have got their own view on what they're doing and why they believe that's more important or why it should be done in a different way. Stay out of judgment. Try and understand. Listen. When we do all of these things, what we end up doing is we end up choosing empathy. As I said earlier, when it comes to design, we're often working with this distant group of people, end users. Maybe they're personas. Maybe they're a part of some research that you did and you've got a bunch of videos that you're watching back. Maybe it's a community of people that you work with like I do. Ultimately, that group can be quite distant. And it's really important that we take the time to understand them by choosing empathy. When I went back to that village in Pakistan, for me it was about choosing empathy. I did it reluctantly, but I did it anyway. I didn't know what I was going into, but it was a choice that I made. It was harder, it took effort, but I still made that choice. That's a choice that everyone in this room can make in all of the work that you do, when you're designing things, building things. Don't just make that choice for the people that you're designing and building for. Make that choice for the people around you. Any success that I've seen in teams that I've worked with, it's all come back to that spirit in the team, that belief that we're behind the same thing and we're aiming for the same things. And that's why it's so important to make that choice. So the final thing I'll say to everyone is, when you leave this session, when you leave this event, think about empathy and think about the fact that it's a choice. How can you make that choice in everyday life? How can you make that choice in the work that you do with the people you work with? Try and think of those relationships that are difficult. Maybe with product managers, engineers. Maybe it's someone who doesn't get design or doesn't get UX. How can you choose empathy in those situations? And finally, I want to thank everyone for listening. I want to thank Andy for inviting me here, and especially Jenny, who got in touch with me and invited me here. So thank you very much, everyone. Really appreciate your time.